Did you know there are two magic words that instantly change the way a woman looks at you? Not because they're clever, not because they're seductive, but because they're honest. Two magic words that I wish someone had told me earlier, because for years, I thought being agreeable meant being good. I thought staying quiet meant staying safe. There was a time I believed that love meant letting the other person decide where to eat, what to do, how to live. I wasn't passive. I just thought that by always saying yes, I was keeping us close. By not expressing too much, I was making things easier. But the truth was quieter and more painful. I wasn't just avoiding conflict. I was avoiding myself. They say men don't talk much, but they rarely ask why. It's not because we have nothing to say. It's because somewhere along the way, we learned that speaking up could cost us connection. So we learned to be silent. Not because we had peace, but because we feared rocking the boat. And slowly, the silence stopped being a choice. It became a habit, a mask. The woman in our life thought we were being easygoing. She didn't see the man shrinking. She didn't hear what he never said. We learned to smile through it, to nod when we meant maybe, to say I'm good when we were lost. And we called it maturity. But it wasn't maturity. It was disappearance. The two magic words, they're not loud. They're not poetic. They don't beg or bargain, but they center you. They make you real again. They are the start of every clear relationship and the end of every fake one. If you've ever been the man who let others decide for you, if you've ever swallowed your truth to be accepted, this video is the moment you stop. Because here's what I finally learned. Real men don't stay silent to be loved. They speak to stay true. And those two magic words, I didn't say them to impress. I didn't say them to convince. I said them quietly, clearly not to win her heart, but to reclaim my own. I want, not to get more, but to stop giving myself away. So if you're ready to say them for the first time in years, subscribe to Deep Modern Man, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below. Your voice still matters. Start here. And you know what? He never meant to disappear. But somewhere between choosing the restaurant she liked and always saying him fine when he wasn't, he slowly started to fade. Not physically, but emotionally, internally, quietly. He became a man who confused agreement with affection. A man who believed that saying I want would make him selfish, demanding, or worse, unlovable. So he said nothing. Not because he didn't feel, but because he thought feeling would cost him connection. In the beginning, it looked like love, deference, kindness. He let her decide the plans, the pace, the preferences. He didn't want to be difficult. He thought, if she's happy, then we're happy. And so he made room, again and again, until there was no room left for him. He stopped naming what he needed. He stopped noticing what he missed. And over time, something subtle happened. He stopped being seen, not because she didn't care, but because he trained her not to ask. He taught the relationship that he had no preferences, that his silence meant ease, that his absence in decision-making meant support. But underneath that quiet cooperation was a growing ache, a man trying to be appreciated while acting like he didn't need to be. The problem wasn't her dominance. It was his vanishing. He wasn't indecisive. He was hesitant. Because somewhere in his past, wanting too clearly had cost him connection. Somewhere. Someone had told him directly or not that men who want are too much. That voicing desire creates pressure. That clarity pushes people away. So he made himself soft. So soft that eventually no one could feel him anymore. She used to ask, "What do you think?" And he'd say, "Whatever you want." She used to wonder, "Where do you want to go?" And he'd shrug, "Anywhere is fine." She stopped asking eventually. Not because she didn't care, but because he made it too easy not to. And that's how a man gets lost, not in conflict, but in consent. Not because he was wrong, but because he stopped showing up as someone with gravity, with voice, with edge. He wasn't trying to manipulate her. He was trying to hold on to something, to be accepted, to avoid rejection. He believed that staying soft, flexible, accommodating would make him irreplaceable, but it made him invisible. And when she drifted, when she pulled away, when she said, "I just don't feel it anymore," he didn't understand. But I never did anything wrong, he told himself. And he didn't. But that was the problem. He never did anything true either. He never said, "I want to see you Friday night," or "I want this relationship to feel more equal," or simply, "This matters to me." She didn't leave because he was cruel. She left because he wasn't clear, and clarity isn't aggression. It's presence. Desire isn't selfish. It's how someone knows you're still there. The quiet truth is this. A man who never says "I want" eventually becomes the man no one asks. He becomes forgettable not because he lacks value, but because he refused to value himself out loud. And when men look back, they often say the same thing. "I didn't know what I wanted because I never gave myself permission to speak." Not anymore. There was a time when he believed that softness was the same as safety, that if he just stayed agreeable, just avoided conflict, he could keep love intact. So every time he felt something rise inside him, he learned to push it back down. The sentence would form in his chest, reach his throat, and dissolve before reaching his lips. He'd say, "Whatever works for you," instead of, "This matters to me." And every time he did that, something small inside him dimmed. He remembers it clearly now. The dinner where she asked what movie to watch, and he said, "You pick." The weekend plans he let her plan alone. The moment she asked, "Are you sure you're okay with this?" And even though he wasn't, he nodded. Not because he wanted to lie, but because he didn't want to lose her. Not because he didn't have preferences, but because somewhere along the line, he had learned that having them made him difficult. The root goes deeper than any single relationship. He was taught that good men are accommodating, that strong men make space, stay steady, stay quiet. From childhood, the message was clear. Don't upset anyone. Don't need too much. Be grateful. Be kind. Be patient. So when relationships came into his life, he defaulted to silence. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much about being accepted. He thought love meant being easy to love. But there's a difference between being loving and being invisible. He began to recognize the pattern only when it was too late. She grew distant. Not because he failed to try, but because she never truly knew who he was. She fell in love with his politeness, but never with his presence. And he couldn't blame her. He had never shown her his center, just the version of him that was soft enough not to offend, gentle enough not to disrupt, quiet enough not to be rejected. He used to say, "If you want, we could hang out." Now he realizes, that's not clarity. That's permission seeking. He should have said, "I want to take you out Friday night, not to dominate, but to lead, to bring direction instead of deflection," because what he needed wasn't more approval. What he needed was to show up fully. One day, someone asked him, "Why do you always let her decide?" And he answered without thinking, "Because I thought being easygoing would make me easier to love." And that's when it hit him. He hadn't lost her because he didn't care. He lost her because he wasn't clear, not about his opinions, not about his feelings, not about who he really was when he wasn't performing peace. And clarity is not about control. It's about being known. Desire is not dominance. It's the willingness to take emotional responsibility. That day, he stopped apologizing for having a voice. He stopped whispering what needed to be spoken. Because no woman can follow a man who won't even follow himself. It didn't happen in one day. Saying "I want" felt like lifting something, heavy, something his throat wasn't sure it could carry. But one morning, while ordering coffee, he surprised himself. He didn't ask, "Can I get a like?" He always did. He looked the barista in the eye and said, "I want a coffee." It was small. But for a man who had lived years softening his wants to avoid discomfort, it was a beginning. That same weekend, he sent a message, not vague, not polite. "I want to see you this weekend. Know if you're free. Know only if you want. Just clarity. Just presence." And later, face to face, he said something he had never dared say out loud. "I want to know you better." He watched her eyes, surprised at first, then softening, not because he was demanding, but because he was direct. And there is something disarming about a man who doesn't perform interest but names it. He began to realize the strength wasn't in shouting his desires. It was in owning them, in taking emotional responsibility for them. Because "I want" is not a request. It's a declaration. And behind that declaration is a man willing to carry what he asks for. Many women he had met before didn't pull away when he was clear. In fact, something in them leaned closer. Because while the world teaches men to be agreeable, women don't want a man who disappears behind politeness. They don't feel safer when a man always says "up to you." They feel safer when a man says, "This is where I stand." They don't need someone who constantly adjusts. They need someone they can align with. And that begins with direction. In one relationship, when things became more serious, he said, "I want to spend more time with you." It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't pressure. It was orientation. A man showing emotional leadership not through control, but through clarity. And clarity isn't just a preference. It's protection. It says, "I'm here. And if you're here too, we can build something grounded." One night, after a conversation that had finally gone deep, she asked him, "What changed you?" He smiled, not because he had a speech, but because he had a sentence. "I stopped being afraid to want." And maybe that's what it really comes down to. Most men don't lack feelings. They lack permission to feel out loud. to want without shrinking, to lead without controlling, to look a woman in the eyes and say something as simple as, "I want this." Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And a man who says "I want" with clarity is choosing to become someone present responsible not for her feelings, but for his own truth. Because not every silence is respect, and not every deference is love. Sometimes, letting her decide everything isn't kindness, it's avoidance. It's fear disguised as support. He had to learn this the hard way. I didn't lose her because I didn't care. I lost her because I wasn't clear. So no, he speaks, not to control, but to connect. There comes a point in a man's life when saying "I want" is no longer about hoping someone will say yes. It's about making peace with the part of him that no longer stays silent just to be accepted. By now, he's stopped trying to impress anyone with how agreeable he can be. He no longer fears rejection the way he used to, because he's realized something most men take years to understand. Saying "I want" isn't a demand. It's not manipulation. It's a form of alignment. It tells the world where he stands. It gives the other person a chance to meet him there or walk away. And either outcome is okay. He remembers the first time he was clear about what he wanted, and she said no. "I'm not free that day," she replied. And something in him braced for the old spiral panic, overthinking, retraction. But instead, he smiled and said, "Sure, I understand. How about Saturday instead?" He didn't crumble. He didn't shrink, because he wasn't asking for permission to be himself. He was simply offering presence. That's what confidence feels like, not certainty of outcome, but peace with whatever comes. Because when a man says "I want" with clarity, he's not trying to win. He's trying to be honest with her, and more importantly, with himself. It took him years to learn that. Years of filtering his words, softening his tone, adjusting to keep the peace. And all it ever gave him was the quiet ache of being half present in his own life. But not anymore. Now, when he speaks, he means it. Not because he's trying to get his way, but because his way finally matters to him. And if she walks away, if she doesn't respond well, if she says, "I'm not feeling this anymore," he won't chase. He won't beg, because he didn't lose her. They just weren't vibrating at the same frequency. And clarity gave them both the gift of knowing that. He doesn't want to force closeness anymore. He wants resonance. He wants shared rhythm, not negotiated survival. And sometimes, the strongest thing a man can do is let someone go, knowing he never betrayed himself to keep them. He said it out loud once, standing alone in his apartment. "I don't need her to do what I want. I just need to stop silencing what I feel." It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was release. Because freedom isn't always walking away. Sometimes, it's standing still and not flinching. That morning, he poured a cup of coffee. The sun was coming through the kitchen window. There was no one to ask what he needed, no one waiting for his answer. But he looked up, exhaled, and thought, "Today, I will say what I want, even if no one asks." There are moments. He used to think silence would protect him from rejection, from conflict, from loss. But silence only made him invisible, even to himself. What changed wasn't the world around him. It was the moment he chose to stop abandoning his own voice. That's the journey we've walked together in this video. From the man who stayed quiet to keep love, to the man who speaks clearly to protect it. From the one who whispered to avoid upsetting others, to the one who now says, I want with presence, not pressure. Because I want is not about control. It's not a tactic or a test. It's how a man honors the truth of his own soul and invites another human being to meet him there. To say I want is to declare, I exist, I feel, I choose. Carl Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And when you say what you want, even if it's something small, you begin that terrifying, beautiful work of becoming whole. You stop waiting for permission. You stop shrinking to be kept. You stop using softness as camouflage. And you start speaking like someone who finally belongs to himself. So let me ask you, if being clear makes you feel more human, why have you waited this long? If this video reached you, even a little, take one small step. Write down one thing you'll say I want to this week. Not to get approval, not to win, just to remember what it feels like to live in your own skin. Because another man might be reading and your clarity might give him a reason to begin again. And if this space reminded you that your voice matters, don't leave quietly. Subscribe to Deep Modern Man. Hit like. Turn on the bell. This is where we practice saying what we mean, not to overpower anyone, but to stop losing ourselves. This is not about speaking louder. It's about finally speaking real,